Hello and welcome to Season 8, Episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop, and I was in kind of a crummy mood until we were testing the microphones, and my silly noises just put me in a brighter outlook on life. Hearing that played back to myself, I was giggling.
That's great. So you do that often, and then every time it plays back, you laugh, almost like in sync with your laugh on the recording, because you make stupid noises. You laugh at yourself while you're doing it. You laugh at it again when we play it back. But we are, of course,
I'm
reading.
easily entertained.
Yes, you
By
are.
myself only. Everybody else has a hard act to follow, and that act is me.
That's great, Dad.
All right, go ahead.
We are, of course, reading Moral Politics by George Lakoff as he attempts to describe linguistically how liberals and conservatives think. And this time, we're finally getting into what he thinks each side thinks of particular issues, this time talking about social programs and taxes, which, of course, he explains in a very roundabout way for conservatives. But as we were kind of talking about beforehand...
Off camera.
Yes, well, it's always off camera, but off mic, I guess, that he does give, I think good answers or accurate answers for what the liberal thinks, because that's what he is, and he's really just describing his own thoughts. And you were kind of saying, like, that's really the only good part to take out of this book is how he describes liberals, because he just does not understand conservatives at all.
Well, I was saying a little bit more than that. Yes. He's so dishonest about conservatives. Yes. It's so bad it has to be intentional. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like mere incompetence does not explain the writing of this book.
Which is unusual because, I mean, his express purpose here is like to help each side better understand the other. And
that
of course,
is a lie.
Well, yes, but it's
number one purpose of book.
I do think there is
for this purpose.
Yes.
Lie. Now I'm going to write things in the book. Lie. Everything is a lie.
Yes. What I was going to say is that I think he wrote this to be a tool for Democrats, because, I mean, at this point in time, Democrats were losing. He's like, we have to show them, how the conservatives think so we can get back on top. But he's just doing such a terrible job of it. I don't know how this would have helped any Democrat that he's, favorable to, that he's trying to achieve his goal.
Well, you have to realize what era this was written in. Mm-hmm. This is in the Bill Clinton era, after he started triangulating with his political guru Dick Morris.
Yes,
do you know who Dick Morris is?
I know the name.
He's kind of a sleazy kind of guy, but where they basically just co-opted a lot of the Republican talking points and some of the actual policies to triangulate to get reelected, and it was successful. He had been impeached for the Monica Lewinsky affair and all the lies associated. Wait a second. And he paid off Paula Jones. So something kind of similar to, except for Paula Jones said she was raped. But anyway, so then he kind of changed his politics, and Newt Gingrich was rising in the Congress. He was the Speaker of the House, and so the conservatives were ascendant at the time, and that was just bizarre for people like Mr. Lakoff back in the 90s. Like, how are people voting for these people? I didn't know. Nobody I know voted for a conservative. But anyway, and he just seemed, as we mentioned talking before you started, I don't want to belabor my problems with the author, but I'm going to. But I'm hoping not to, because he's not only wrong, he's just so dishonest about conservatives. So I will talk about a little bit of what he had to say. But I think the only value in the book is his descriptions of liberal philosophy and their liberal morality. And if it was just that book, it would be a lot easier to get through without being angry. And so what are we talking about? This is chapter 10, where he's getting into some of the details. He has this theory, the strong father theory for conservatives, and the nurturing parent mother theory for the liberals, and that's their moral philosophy, and everything flows from that. So that's his theory. Now he's let's apply it to the facts and see how this plays out. So this chapter is really the first in earnest to go into specific policy proposals and how those two moral philosophies explain how, not only how they communicate, which he should have limited himself to, but also how they think about these issues. and that's social programs and taxes.
Which is good that we're finally getting to, the meat of the book 10 chapters in. It's taken him a very long time.
Well, and it's really just one introductory chapter that he keeps repeating over and over again. But
yes.
So, he starts talking about, again, introduces the two models, et cetera, et cetera. But he says, liberals apply the nurturant parent model. Consequently, it is natural for liberals to see the federal government as a strong, nurturing parent. And I think that's accurate. That's how they view it. I don't think it's because of the nurturant parent model. I think it's because that is their philosophy of government.
Yes.
That they think the government, I guess you could, chicken the egg, maybe. So, he says, that their belief, and I'm at the top of 180, that, these social programs in a liberal point of view is that they will make them into productive citizens. So if you use government funds to help people out, that will make them be productive citizens. And the measure of a social program, he says that the liberals' the measure of a social program is whether it produces a return on the investment. I think that is the biggest lie he tells about liberals in this book, because he then corrects that inadvertently with the beginning of the next paragraph, where he says liberals also conceptualize social programs as investment in communities, and then he claims it's like a multiplier effect for any spending in these communities. Which we're talking about, disadvantaged, so-called disadvantaged, or now they're saying underserved communities. And I'm wondering, how much service do we have to provide to these underserved? All of the government resources are going into the underserved programs. I'm wondering, when have they been served enough?
Yes.
I'm reminded of the drunk at the bar at the end of the night. You have been overserved. Overserved is kind of a quasi legal term, so if you overserve somebody and they say, "Here's your keys, go home," you have potential liability because you overserved. So they're underserved, but that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to make up for perceived wrongdoings, and I think he's right about that. But I'm just going to disregard his lie that they do a cost benefit analysis about these programs. I have not heard a liberal give a cost benefit analysis about a program, social program. In 40 years.
I mean, I think he's right that they see it as a sort of investment, but I don't think they do it any sort of cost-benefit analysis. Because I think he's wrong in describing like it's some sort of utilitarian, cost-effective principle. But I think he's absolutely right. They say, well, if we just give them, X more money, then they'll finally be able to pick themselves up and get back to where everybody else is and be, just like everybody else. As long as we just have this extra grant or this extra program, just more and more and more, then finally we'll be at the right spot.
Yes. And I think he accurately describes that, and that's their view. And it's important for conservatives to understand that this is their religion.
Yes.
He's talking about a moral framework, and I think he's right about that. It's a religion without God, and their deity. Their main focus of their deity is to promote fairness. However they define that, and he gives the Stations of the Cross, so to speak, that they have to serve to fight racism, sexism, poverty, the lack of education, and homophobia, which are their the demons that they must fight.
Yeah, and I think he's right too. He says they're seen not only as barriers to empathy and nurturance, but also as barriers to the free pursuit of self-interest and self-development by disadvantaged individuals and groups.
Yes,
I would extend that even more. I think a lot of them believe that if anyone, is X, Y, or Z, then it threatens, the existence of all people. I think you hear that a lot.
Right.
It's like if you do this bad thing, then all of these people are in danger. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So I will mention, he says the conservatives, on the other hand, the strict father theory, that social programs coddle people, and instead he says that they have this moral belief that they have to learn to fend for themselves, and I have written in my margin, he misspelled support themselves, not fend for themselves, but they have to support themselves.
Yes.
But in any event, and he says this makes them morally weak if they're on the public dole, but he I guess we'll go down the path a little bit. He misunderstands the idea of what a government encourages will produce more of that thing that it encourages. And so if you encourage people to lay about by paying them to lay about, you're going to get more people that'll lay about.
Yes.
And so, and then he talks, which I thought was really interesting about, he says, the myth of America is the land of opportunity. He just states that. It's the myth of the land of opportunity.
I think he might be using myth not as like the lie, the false thing, but as the story that is commonly told. Right? Because I think he talks about that earlier too. Like there's a lot of myths that we tell, not necessarily myth, pejorative, but a lot of commonly held stories, commonly held beliefs.
Yes.
So I don't take too much issue with that, because I think that is a myth in the literal sense, not in the sense of it as a fake thing.
Come off my high horse about that. But he talks about the ladder of opportunity metaphor being interesting. It implies that the ladder is there, that everyone has access to it. And the only thing involved in becoming successful and being able to take care of oneself is putting out the energy to climb it. He doesn't refute it, but he obviously is describing it as if it does not exist.
Yes, he's implicitly saying that it does not exist, but it's assuming that it exists.
Yeah, that's part. The other thing I guess, I don't know if it aggravates me more than his deception, is his cowardice. Just say it.
Yeah. Well, we have like the last third of the book where I guess he's just going to just say it.
So, but he does make, I think I even talked about this earlier, about
with the natural disaster.
The natural disaster is morally justified because you're helping out people who are in that situation because of nothing of their own. Conservatives only support governmental assistance for those rare circumstances as opposed to, just people generally needing help.
Yeah.
Because, and this is the thing that I think is a real key criticism I have of him, is that he doesn't understand the difference between what is effective. I think I said this before. What is effective and what is moral. He doesn't differentiate between the public role of public assistance and the private role of private charity.
Yes.
He just thinks it's all the same thing, and he doesn't understand that a lot of conservatives have, like our priest this weekend talked about serving the prisoners, the homeless, and all that kind of stuff, and I support that. That's different than the government saying, "Give me half your money so I can give it to these prisoners." And these drug addicts living on the street.
Well, I think he also says, even a little bit later, I think he's talking about specifically like government programs, but like conservatives discourage, their children and young people from volunteering in them because like participating in those is like adding to this culture of coddling. Right. And that is so far from the truth.
Correct.
I mean, I think, maybe not join a government program, but I mean, conservatives all over the place are joining, charitable organizations, just sort of crossing that out by and large, saying don't join charitable organizations, just helping coddle people is crazy.
Yeah, and along those lines, at the bottom of 181, he says the thing that is he's the dumbest about. He's describing the conservative moral theory. He says if people were not rewarded for being moral and punished for being immoral, there would be no morality.
Yes,
and I mean, he's just willfully ignorant at this point. I mean, that's not what any conservatives think. He says, he continues, if people were not rewarded for being self-disciplined and punished for being slothful, there'd be no self-discipline and society would break down. But that's not what any conservative thinks. They think that if you're paying, like I said, if you're paying people to do bad things, you're going to encourage more people to do bad things. I mean, and if you punish people for committing violent crime, you get less violent crime. Yeah, especially if the punishment's a little bit more faster than our sclerotic system is currently.
He's assuming that conservatives are some sort of behaviorists, that everything is just determined by what you've been taught and what happens to you. And I think the opposite is true. I think you see that much more often from the side of the left that says, well, this is just the result of societal factors. This is just how you were raised. You need to break out of the behavior that you've been taught.
Right.
But conservatives, on the other hand, say, well, no, there is objective morality.
Right.
That's why we need, a system of punishment to uphold, what we already know is an existing system of morality.
Yes.
The punishment and reward system does not create the morality. It's based on that pre-existing morality.
Yes.
And he just does not recognize that, or maybe does and does not describe it accurately.
Well, and it's weird because he claims on the one hand that conservatives believe in this behavioralism that we're determined. You know, like you just mentioned, the cost benefit and punish this and that. But then he claims it's a moral theory. Well, which one is it? Because if it's just cut and dry, we just want to encourage this. Where's the moral side of it? I don't think he understands what morality is.
Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Maybe
So then his citation for the evil conservative thinkers is the great philosopher James Dobson, who I don't even think was a minister, but he was on Focus of the Family. I think it was a big movement in evangelical Christian. Became political. I don't really know the guy that well, but he's like as a Catholic, he was. I'm sure he had some influence in some like there was with the moral majority. Ever hear the moral majority? Okay, so that was from the 80s, which is like evangelical Christian ministers. I don't know if you call them televangelists, but close.
Yeah.
Where these guys, and a lot of them, I'm sure, were great people and doing it all for the right reasons, but they also seemed to get very wealthy as time went by. But he talks about he quotes from Dobson's book. I think is what is it a book or is it a article?
The New Dare to Discipline. Yeah, this book.
Yeah. And so he has this quote that the Dobson's talking about saying, well, so communism and socialism are destroyers of motivation because they penalize creativity and effort. The law of reinforcement is violated by the very nature of those economic systems. Free enterprise works hand in hand with human nature because people strive for things to benefit themselves. He completely misunderstands what that point is. Dobson in this excerpt is making a completely and totally practical analysis of why communism and socialism don't work. It's not really a moral argument. It's just saying if people will not get more from more work, they won't work as more. Why would they? I mean, you're just wasting time. At that point. And it's just human nature that you're not just going to be making futile efforts to improve something if it's not going to improve for yourself or anybody around you. And he mentions it if it's a moral theory. Yeah. I don't understand what he's talking about here.
I don't either. And I know we were talking, before we started recording, and I never heard of Dobson. I don't know who this guy is. And you kind of made the point that he's just picking, pop culture, like writers, it'd be like picking, like Charlie Kirk to represent all of conservative thought. And that's a big problem here. If you're only picking articles and quotes from the past, 5 years, he's writing this in 96, Dobson was writing this in 92.
Yes.
You're just inherently never going to understand conservatism. That's like the whole point is that we think that there's something much older and much more lasting. But if you're only picking like the top pop culture stuff that's coming out at the current time, you're just going to miss so much of the underlying beliefs and morality of the whole system. It's like, I just don't know why he thinks that these very specific, very current, very pop culture people are going to represent all of conservatism.
Yeah, and it's really striking to me because they were not spokesmen for the conservative movement. Even they were a branch of it. So like you'd have fiscal conservatives, you'd have the neocons, focusing on foreign policy a lot of times, and you'd have the flat tax people, you have the libertarians, and then you have the religious right, which were a solid block, but they were a block, and a subset. And Dobson would be one of them. I'm trying to think of the other characters around that era, and then it'd be like, like Billy Graham, but Billy Graham was less political. I'm trying to think of who'd be the modern equivalent, but I don't even pay attention to those people anymore. But so anyway, so let's talk about. I kind of want. I'm trying to remember to focus on the positive aspects of the book, which is descriptions of liberal moral theory and how they see the world, because it is important to remember. I mean, we could talk about his quote of, he's now talking about the super demon Hillary Clinton and Rush Limbaugh criticizing Hillary, which he did all the time. But I don't think we need to really belabor that. But he does say a liberal's, let's see, at the top of 184, the issue for conservatives is a moral issue touching the very heart of conservative morality, a morality where a liberal's compassion and fairness are neither compassionate nor fair. And he says, even financial arguments won't carry the day. The issue isn't about money, it's about morality. But leading up to that, he's talking about all these practical arguments about why you wouldn't do something. And then he talks about AmeriCorps. Have you ever heard of AmeriCorps?
I have, very briefly.
Yeah.
Like, I've never really looked into it.
So it was a big push by Bill Clinton as part of his triangulation because he's like, well, you know how we have Peace Corps where you go out and do work for overseas and young people go out and they don't get paid much, but it's a great public service. Well, AmeriCorps was his theory of, paying, subsidizing young people to do work in inner cities and all that. It's now just a jobs program and a loan forgiveness program, and it's still around. I did look up today because I remember reading that there's a bunch of financial irregularities with AmeriCorps.
Of course.
Well, they haven't had a positive audit report in over 7 years, meaning that their auditors say there are inadequate controls on all the money that they have in order for the audit to even be completed properly, because there are no appropriate controls for the money going in or going out.
There you go.
And so that might be, maybe, a reason why conservatives would say, I don't think we should fund AmeriCorps because they can't account for their own money. That I think it's a semi-private organization fully funded by the federal government, one of those agencies that they create, kind of spin off, so all their cronies can get on the corporate board seats.
Yes, of course.
Anyway, so he talks about this, but he's it's a liberal program. It's like the perfect liberal program because it allows students to pay off college debt and loans while working in social programs in local communities. And he says, the conservatives should love this program because the cost benefit, it's an investment in our youth and all that kind of stuff. But he says that they don't like it because it's students are being coddled through the government's provision of ready-made work for them to pay off their loans and all that.
Yeah, because this is what I was talking about earlier. He goes on to say, since the students are not seen as doing honest, productive work in the free market when they work in a social program, they're not seen as earning their loan payoff. Yeah. And that can't be farther from the truth. I don't know how many conservative families I know that encourage their children to volunteer and get involved with charitable organizations. And it's like you look at all these Christian organizations especially, there's always going to be a charitable service outreach part to it. And they see that as more valuable than just working for money because you're doing that of your own time, your own free will, and you're not getting anything from it. You're just going out and serving the community. He says, well, conservatives hate that. Well, they might dislike AmeriCorps because it's inefficient and bleeding money,
right? But
they love charitable work. You can't just cross off all charitable work to conservatives as this evil, horrible thing that they all hate. It's insane.
I've long suspected that liberals don't volunteer or do anything good in their private lives. So they feel like, well, the government needs to do all that stuff, and I'll pay my little share, and then I'll forget about doing. I won't actually have to do anything, and of course I'll pay a lower tax rate than the rich. We'll get to that in a minute. But in any event, so he does mention liberals, of course, have a different moral perspective on social programs. Nurturant parent morality applied to politics makes social programs moral, as we saw above. A double social program, which he considers AmeriCorps, is even better because you're paying off both sides of it. Yeah. It just means it's double expense. So he asserts, without any sort of support, in the middle of the 185, the major differences in moral worldview, they are not just differences of opinion about effective public administration. The differences are not about efficiency or practicality or economics, and they cannot be settled by rational argument about effective administration. I think that he's telling on himself with regard to the liberals. I think if AmeriCorps was super efficient and effective at reducing violent crime in the inner city, increasing academic test scores in elementary education, because that's some of the things that their focus is supposed to be on, the conservatives would be like, amen, brother. Yeah. Let's get those kids reading and doing math and all that kind of stuff. If you can convince conservatives to fund that program, Well, I'm sure that I bet you, I haven't even looked this up, I bet you a majority of Republicans have voted to increase funding for AmeriCorps 9 out of the last 10 years, if not at 10 for 10. But Republicans aren't necessarily conservative. But anyway. So moving along,
goes on to orphanages.
Yeah, orphanages. I'm not even going to talk about it. You can talk about it. You want to talk about orphanages? We can talk about orphanages.
Not really. I mean, all he says is that conservatives want to steal children away from their families because they're evil. That's kind of what he says. He says, he takes. I'd never heard of this proposal, but like to take children out from their mothers if they're like single mother households. Is that what the argument is he's talking about here?
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
I honestly don't recall that ever being a serious proposal from anybody during my lifetime, except for in cases of extreme abuse and neglect and the lack of available foster placement. Then maybe we should invest in orphanages again, because what we're doing isn't working for those kids.
Yeah, because what he frames it as, he says, well, if you have a child out of wedlock and you're poor and you can't afford to pay for the child, the Republicans are going to come in and they're going to steal them and give them to the orphanage because the orphanage is going to instill better, strict father values. And that's just insane. I think anyone who reads that should think that's insane. Yeah, but then he talks about drugs after that.
Well, he talks about the Just Say No program, which I don't know if you ever heard of.
Oh, yeah, because that's still like a thing in DARE. Just
say
no to drugs and violence.
Another completely waste of taxpayer money, and sometimes the DARE people will want to do some donations from my civic organizations that I'm in or from our firm. I'm not giving money to DARE. Yeah. DARE is proven to be completely ineffective at reducing drug and alcohol use, abuse, and addiction. Period. You can. They've studied communities that have it and communities that don't have it, and there's no difference. Yes. None at all.
I remember DARE is like a week-long program. For anyone who's listening who doesn't know what DARE is, it's like a week-long program where like a local like police officer comes in and tells you, don't do drugs. Here's some information about drugs. Don't do them. Yes. And we did it in like 5th grade, so I'm like 11, 12.
They also teach the kids, okay, this is meth, also called smack, also called this, and it looks like this. This is how you inject it. Meth is a universal drug because you can smoke it, snort it, or inject it.
Yes.
Ooh.
What I remember from DARE
is Officer Dipshit for teaching all these kids how to do drugs, but don't do drugs. Yes.
To be fair, what I remember
heroin. Well, you inject it, you have this sense of wonder.
Yes.
Oh, that sounds awesome. No! Go ahead.
I was going to say, what I remember from DARE, I don't remember anything about the drug education stuff. The officer owned a horse, and he brought the horse to school on the last day of DARE. That's what I remember.
That's good.
But yeah, I mean, what he says is that, well, the conservatives are in favor of the Don't Say No program because you should be morally strong enough just to resist it. And of course, that's what all conservatives think always.
Well, the Just Say No program was really fairly widely mocked. It was a Nancy Reagan advertisement campaign that was just like, which was just talking about abstinence of drug use, and you can say no, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes,
it reminds me, although I don't think it compares favorably to Michelle Obama's school lunch program. That wasn't. That program, which wasted, I don't know, who knows how many millions of pounds of bad food.
Oh, it's awful.
But
I still remember the switch because I was like 8, 9,
and
maybe something like that.
Our Catholic school adopted that. That was anyway. Whatever. I don't want to go down.
It was disgusting.
But it's of similar importance in that was not a key philosophical position of the liberals.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a flavor of it because they wanted more government intervention in the school lunch, all the way down to the the meal that a kid is eating in Podunk, Missouri. I mean, I guess in a sense you could use that as an example of their philosophy, but that's no more indicative of the overall belief system than the Just Say No. Yeah. And Just Say No, yes. It's a flavor of, hey, you shouldn't be doing drugs in the first place. Why don't you just say no, dummy? But any event. Yes. So then, I thought I had on here, I thought I circled it. Or he was talking about sex ed. Maybe it's a little bit later.
He does, yeah.
Okay,
he says,
it's later.
It's in here. It says, this is the same as the conservative answer to teen pregnancy and the spread of AIDS. Don't give that condoms or clean needles because that just encourages promiscuity. He says, well, of course, conservatives can be opposed to that because you're just encouraging that very thing if you give out,
I was thinking maybe
needles.
my dipshit elementary school teacher shouldn't be handing out condoms to minors.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they're, what was it? Norm Macdonald talked about, that the school teachers had sex with more children than all the priests combined. Go down to Father Norm's. if a listener has not listened to the audio of Norm Macdonald's rant about who are the real heroes,
very good.
Do so now. Anyway.
Well, that reminds me a lot of stuff up at Truman with like the sex education stuff. That's one of the only things that the student government does up at Truman.
Is it educate about sex?
Well, not really. They just spend a bunch of the StuGov budget on sexual prevention products, and that's what they do. Yes, and they just have a big bowl of them.
You're talking about they're not well. The student government in itself is a sexual prevention.
yes, contraception. Yes.
Because nobody's going to have sex with anybody in the student government.
That is
no,
true.
You're talking about
anti-contraception
devices.
Yes, that is what I meant to say.
Yes, their manner of speaking and their appearance is a sex prophylactic.
That is.
That I thought was funny.
Okay,
all right,
let's.
So he goes on to immigration, which I do think I did like this because even though he insults conservatives because it's whatever, but I think he accurately describes how liberals look at it.
Yes.
From the I'm going to quote from the book 188. From the perspective of nurture and parent morality, powerless people with no moral intent.
No immoral intent.
No immoral intent. I read it too accurately. No immoral intent are seen as innocent children needing nurturance. Mm-hmm. For the most part, illegal immigrants fall into that category. I think that's a really good way of looking at their philosophy about it. Is that even all the adults and the gangbangers and the human traffickers and the drug dealers, MS-13 gang members, they're all just innocent children that we need to take care of.
Well, because every time you talk to anyone about immigration, it's always, well, they're just over here because they have so much of a worse life over there, and they just want to work and have the opportunities that we have here. And they just completely ignore, well, hey, maybe we shouldn't leave the border wide open because that's going to let in all the bad people, too.
Yes.
And ignoring also all the economic effects of letting on all the people who would actually work and not commit any crimes, but just letting them in, by and large, would disrupt the economy.
I have a brilliant plan that I just thought of. We need to round up all the AmeriCorps people and make them go over to Honduras or wherever these people are coming from and improve their community so they don't have to leave. And that's really the solution.
Yeah.
I mean, practically, you have to, well, I mean, it's twofold, but I mean, really, for the nurturant parent theory, I think this is a good thing for conservatives to understand. Mm-hmm. Because it's all about compassion and all about feelings. And I think a conservative can win over some borderline people on this if you say that we are going to have a jobs program in Honduras. Mm-hmm. We are going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to improve their lives over there so they don't have to make the dangerous trek. We're spending all these billions of dollars giving money to their military anyway. Why don't we just give it straight to the people or something? Or better yet, move our border about 500 miles to the south and let's just administer it.
Yeah.
You want to be Americans? Well, we're coming to you. So it's like that. Those personal injury attorneys. You don't have to come to us. We'll come to you. You've been injured in a car wreck. I think America needs to go to them.
There you go.
Anyway, so I think he does describe their morality on immigration accurately. I think conservative politicians should pay more attention how they communicate about that. And I think I'm starting to think that maybe that's why people hated Trump so much because he was just so blunt about it. Like when he said, "You think they're sending their best people over here?" And that's a blanket statement impugning the character and the ability and the intelligence of every immigrant that has come over here, which clearly was not his intent. Mm-hmm. But what he's talking about is there's going to be a person, like you said, there's going to be a percentage of people that are going to be getting through here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lakoff also kind of does a similar thing, but just very hypocritically, because he says, well, they're just innocent people who need to be taken care of and stuff like that. But he doesn't give them any credit, because he says they typically perform low-status tasks, such as farm, sweatshop, and restaurant labor, house cleaning, childcare, gardening, odd jobs, and so on. And that's something that you've heard from liberals before.
Oh, for sure.
I think it was Kamala Harris. But in response
to Kamala or Kamala?
Kamala. I think it's Kamala.
Kamala?
Kamala?
Tomato.
But I think it was her, or maybe it was former Speaker of the House, blanking on her name, Pelosi.
Yes.
One of the two. But in response to a question about illegal immigration, she goes, well, who's going to mow your lawn? Yeah. Like in complete earnest. Like if we stop immigration, who's going to cut your lawn?
Yes.
It's like, it's just one of the most racist things I think you could say under the guise of loving the
That's the people
yes.
they know. Like they know it's their housekeeper. He mentions housekeepers
yes.
and gardeners. It's their gardeners and their housekeepers, and they're getting them cheap because the people can't complain about below market wages or below minimum wage wages. It's all about exploiting these people. And the funny thing is, in the 90s, there were a number of Clinton nominees for federal office that got upended because in the background check, it turned out that they were unlawfully paying nannies, gardeners, butlers, all this housing staff with their family unlawfully. And a number of them got sideways and they didn't get confirmed. They had to be withdrawn because they were breaking federal law.
Yeah.
So they couldn't be judges. There couldn't be agency heads. There's so many of them.
Yeah. Well, it's just very hypocritical, of course, in that aspect, but just in the overall rhetoric of like, well, these are great people who are going to come and improve our country, and they're going to be the next, they phrase like the next doctors and lawyers and everything like that. Yes. And then in the same breath, they're going to be like, well, they provide all of the jobs that you don't want to do, and we can make them do it. And well, okay, sure.
That's right. They don't phrase it that way.
Yes, but it's pretty similar.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very patronizing.
Yes.
And that's the whole idea of
the
their
child,
view of government, is that it's the patron, it's the father and mother figure of all of us, and it has to take care of all of us, and it's going to make everything safe. And it's, I think he's onto something with that as a moral philosophy, which I just saw as just kind of weird.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Right.
So then he talks about taxes, and of course he quoted the great conservative philosopher Dan Quayle. But he mentioned in a convention speech, which of course is the most accurate of all philosophical
well, that's
venues.
How Republicans view the whole moral system is at convention speeches. Yeah.
He says, why should the best people be punished by having higher tax rates for the wealthy rather than people that are poorer? And he said a bunch of things here, and it just is so...
Well, it's all based off of that, this assumption that the rich people are inherently the best, and he goes to this whole thing. It's like, well, they've worked for it, and so therefore, the conservatives love them in all regards, and so if we raise taxes on them, it's evil.
Yeah, and he asserts that conservatives have that old theory of the monarchy, that of God anointed those that rule over us. And that's far from the truth from any conservative thinker from the beginning of our republic to today.
It's not even a monarchical system. It's like almost like the ancient Greek idea that the gods allot some things to particular people, and that is just your fate. And if you are poor, then that is because the gods have allotted it for you. Yes. And it's like, that's insane. Nobody actually thinks that there's some sort of, the best people get the best amount of money because something favors them inherently.
Yes.
That's not really how
it
works.
That's what he's asserting, of course. But anyway, but he does say that liberals view it differently, the nurturant parent morality. The well-being of all children matters equally, so that citizens who have more money have more of a duty to help out those who have much less. And they view anybody trying to get out of paying taxes or not paying what liberals say is a fair share, which is completely unfair, as selfish and mean-spirited, because that moral aspect to it, I think he's on to that. Yes. I think he understands his own views, of course, better than he does conservatives, because he doesn't even pay attention to what conservatives say or do. Yes.
Well, I think he's right. I think he's not really getting to the heart of the matter, maybe in a little bit of a roundabout way, but it's that division between almost like we, the helpless children, these poor innocent people, and those horrible, oppressive, mean, evil like parents on top of us who are withholding, our allowance. Yes. In that sort of way, it's like, well, we didn't do anything to deserve this hate from those people, because they view it as an act of not giving instead of an act of being
taken from.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Well, and like you're withholding ill-gotten gain, because he doesn't give any credit to anybody who has actually worked harder and gotten more money because of the hard work and their intelligence and all that. He just assumes that it's just an accident of fate. It's similar to the gods rewarded the better people argument, except for it's just the gods randomly It's like you won the lottery.
Yeah.
Well, you won the lottery, so you don't deserve it. The old was it Obama said you didn't build that.
Yeah.
It certainly flows from this theory. And of course, every liberal doesn't understand military spending or spending on law enforcement. But I thought it was really funny how he's saying, it doesn't make sense that conservatives want to spend money on this, but don't want to spend money on other stuff. So it's not a cost benefit analysis. He does mention the argument that it's the primary necessary function of government to protect you from foreign powers. But he says, well, there's no risk of us being invaded because it's this point,
this is right after
the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. So he has a point, but it's not like the Earth never changes. And of course now, I just find his arguments about military spending so funny now in the last, was it year and a half, 2 years with the Ukraine spending. It's like, where would that money come from? It's the same people. I don't know what his views are now about Ukraine spending, but I'm sure he's in favor of it as far as blowing up as many Russians as he could while simultaneously causing the death of all these Ukrainians. But I don't think he says, liberals focusing on issues of nurturancy, other priorities are more important than the military. I think he's right about that. They note the U.S. spends more on military than the rest of the world combined. You don't need it because all this other stuff. And so it's, he's saying, well, it's the military itself is structured like a strict father morality. And so that's why conservatives love it. And I guess they want to kill people or whatever. And so he does mention that, but he does concede, or he does state that, the liberals' point of view is it's just not a priority. Because, it's about nurturing people, not about defending it from risks that he claims are not even there.
But then he moves on. His last section of this chapter I thought was hilarious in his description of Ronald Reagan and why conservatives like Ronald Reagan. Because he essentially says, like the Reaganomics idea of like the trickle-down economics, it's not that the conservatives were stupid and realized, that the deficit was getting larger. No, that was intentional. They wanted the deficit to
well, that actually was a theory. That was a theory espoused by people in the Reagan administration called Starve the Beast. So they thought if you raise the deficits to a certain level, they'd be forced to cut the programs. And I like how Reagan was a brilliant guy, and he was a brilliant public speaker long before he was president. He was, what was it? There was a radio program that he. This before TV was a big deal, and he had a radio program that he give regular speeches over the radio about really interesting public affairs issues. But he says liberals like to think Ronald Reagan was as stupid, whether he was or not. Those around him certainly were not. It's like, oh, God, can't you just say he's a smart guy? But there was a philosophy that if we just cut taxes and we raise the spending, and he didn't cut the social programs. That was part of the problem. But he did increase military spending a great deal, and he cut taxes, which ended up, at a certain level, if the taxes are high enough, if you cut taxes, you actually increase revenue because it spurs economic growth, which we've seen, like with the Trump tax cuts, brought in a whole hell of a lot more revenue, but of course he spent more than they brought in. But the deficits at this point, when he's writing this, are minuscule. And of course, Clinton famously balanced the budget with Newt Gingrich's help, or insistence, actually, because he wouldn't have, except for the Republicans made him. But now we're adding $1 trillion of debt every 100 days.
But the way he frames it is that all of Reaganomics was designed to literally like suck the money out of the poor and funnel it into Reagan's rich friends.
Rich people.
And that's exactly how he frames it. It's like that's just an insane way to kind of phrase that, almost as if it's a fact. Of course, he's saying, well, this is what the liberals believe. But he's writing it in such a way that it's like, look at how credible this idea is.
Yeah, well, he doesn't mention, I think the highest tax rate at the time was over 50%. So, I mean, what's the morality of having tax rates that are confiscatory at that rate? But he talks about that communism was evil, not just because it was totalitarian, according to conservatives, is because they didn't believe in this capitalism and all this other stuff, and I wrote in the margins, perhaps the mass murdering had something to do with not liking communism, but he doesn't really get into the morality of the liberals until the very end. He says, of course, liberals see their policies as moral and their overall politics as serving moral goals. Conservatives, however, talk as if liberals were degenerates opposed to morality, as if they were corrupted by special interests, as if they loved expensive and inefficient bureaucracy, as if they wanted to take away the rights of citizens. And I'm thinking, yeah, check. But each side sees the other as immoral, corrupt, and lunk-headed. And I think he's right about that. But I just think it's, I just don't, and I keep questioning myself. Maybe I'm falling into a trap of only seeing my point of view too. But don't liberals love expensive and inefficient bureaucracy? I mean, by their actions, and don't they want to take away my rights? They really do, and especially when we talk about the Second Amendment, and now they're talking about the First Amendment. I mean, they actually voted in Congress to modify the First Amendment. I mean, that was during Trump's administration, and so there's some truth to all that. But I do think it's beneficial to recognize, and I think a lot of public thinkers are doing that today. That we're realizing that they have religious beliefs, and I think that's really the message that he's giving, is that he's trying to talk to the liberals and understand, hey, there's a moral viewpoint of conservatives behind all this craziness. But really what he's also sharing is that even though liberals don't have religion, they have religion. Yeah. They have religion without the church, or the church is substituted by the government. Yeah. And I think he's right on the mark on that. And so I think that's beneficial, but he's just so dishonest about describing conservatives. He just doesn't know. And he's looking at these pop culture figures as if they are the intellectual paragons and the creators of the conservative thought, which is not the case.
I think he is right in describing, as kind of you said, the liberal overall worldview of that sort of innocent children versus the evil big man in that regard. And I think combining that with what we were talking about last season with all the relativism, I think those are the two core components of the liberal belief now. And I think the relativism has grown since he wrote this book. Yeah, for sure. And the idea that everybody can just do whatever they want because we're all these little innocent children who are just trying to find our way in the world. And if you try to tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, you're infringing upon my innocence. Yes. I think is a big part of it. And therefore, the government needs to provide us all of these things and protections and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. Good point.
All right. Well, do you have any other thoughts on this chapter?
No.
All right. Well, this has been Season 8, Episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. Next time, we're talking about, what are we talking about?
Death penalty.
Yeah, that's right. Crime and the death penalty. That'll be interesting.